We'll go ahead and get started here. And good morning to everybody. Everybody's running from one venue to the next. I just wanted to, before we get started, Her Excellency Rania Majid has to leave at noon. So I'm going to kind of front load some questions to her. And if she exits, it's not because of my questions or the fact we didn't like the interventions from our host, Majid Futtaim. It's just that she's got a busy schedule. That's a fair comment. It's a delight to do this session. I have covered the region for 30 years, but was based full-time in Abu Dhabi for 10. So I've had a chance to have the exposure to ENN. Obviously, Majid Futtaim is one that helps foster integration with its retail chain and also needs talent. And part of our conversation is about, on the macro, how do we integrate even better than what we've done over the last 2 decades? We've seen incredible economic transformation over that period of time. I always try to look in the totality of a market, and this is a market of better than 500 million consumers, so it's scale. It's the scale of the European Union, much bigger than the United States. But in terms of integration, it could do a much better job. We're starting to see railways connected in the Gulf states. We see the work of the telecommunications providers. A company like Majid Futtaim is in multiple markets across the region. But economic policy-wise, how do we integrate in a better way? We've seen Egypt with a large consumer market pull in a lot of FDI, but how do we take it to the next step is the real discussion we have here. And what are some of the barriers that exist today as well? It's a real pleasure. I want to kind of highlight this, the integration report, because it's been a priority for Majid Futtaim to kind of dig in and see where the soft spots are for improvement. So you can use the QR code there to download it and take a deeper dive. And if we have time after Her Excellency has to leave, I'd love to take a few questions from the report. So Ahmed Ismail is the CEO of Majid Futtaim. Her Excellency Dr. Rania Majid is the Minister of International Cooperation and has done so for many years. Haftan Dowadir, I hope I'm saying that, CEO of EN. And Shireen Pakfar is the Chief Private Partnerships Lead and on philanthropies for the UNHCR. She's not quite here yet, but we have a couple of specific questions for her. So even if she comes in late, it actually will apply. If you don't mind, Ahmed, I'd love to start on this idea of the region itself and the big three in terms of populations and economic might. Egypt, because of its population and a big consumer market and the reforms that have been taking place there. Saudi Arabia, which has accelerated its transformation over the last 7 years. It's almost unrecognizable to what it was before. And the UAE at the heart, small population, a big global player, connectivity with airlines, with telecommunications, and clearly in finance and trade with DP World as well. But what do you see as the leaving off point here? And since you've been behind the report, you want to mark the progress, but where you see are the soft spots going forward. And it's nice to have you.
Thank you. I mean, it's great to be able to continue this new edition of investigating regional economic integration, which we think is coming at a very interesting time for the region. Our part of the world, if you look back perhaps 250 years since the first industrial revolution, the region has been trying to play catch up with the rest of the world. And the economic transformation that has been undergoing in the UAE, in Saudi Arabia, and elsewhere across the region puts us today at a very unique point in history where potentially the next quarter century is more consequential than the last quarter millennia.
Excellent.
And the big three economies, UAE, Saudi, and Egypt, are really, I would say, at the cusp of potentially a new golden age for the Arab world. The three economies collectively have achieved minimum scale, so this is escape velocity. Saudi is $1 trillion economy. The UAE is 75% of the GDP is non-oil. If you put the three countries together, actually on a PPP basis, it is as big, if not larger, than France or the UK. So we have scale. The other point to acknowledge is we also have momentum. The region, especially the big three, if they were a bloc, and they are indeed the three countries joining BRICS, their economic growth rate post-COVID has been the fastest in the world. So scale plus momentum plus an ever-increasing ease of doing business, which the report highlights. I mean, the UAE is already one of the easiest places to do business, continues to go up the rankings. Saudi has had a major leap forward, so did Qatar and Egypt. So this trifecta of scale, momentum, as well as ease of doing business means that we could be looking at a new golden economic age for the region. And the three economies sit at the heart of it. It's also important to acknowledge that there is progress and there is plenty to be optimistic and hopeful about. Because we look at integration through four lenses: free movement of people, capital, talent, and data. And on the first two, there has been tremendous progress. Interregional trade has doubled over a decade. Cross-border FDI is at an all-time high. Still room to improve, but that goes to show that we have at least $1 trillion of GDP opportunity unlock. And that is certainly worth the effort and worth consideration. And it's not just governments. Governments are doing a lot of great initiatives. This week, actually, the UAE launched the Trade Tech Initiative with the World Economic Forum, which we believe is a fantastic enabler for the free movement of goods and plays right into the economic integration agenda. But it's the private sector that needs to take the lead by investing, by leaning forward, by having the right dialogue, and by believing in the future of our region.
Good. Has there been a tendency to look elsewhere for growth? Rania, you have this case where you have the free trade with the European Union. It's a big consumer market, so for you to pull in FDI, it's not an issue. You have a lot of talent that works in the Gulf states as well, so the remittances are very high. Usually there's an issue about labor movement. That's not the case in this region, right? There's a willingness to move. But what do you think, picking up on Ahmed's points here, are the areas where we can advance at a faster pace?
Well, let me first commend MENAP for doing this exercise. I've been attending this report since its inception in 2020. And this was just before COVID hit. So one of the successive shocks sort of push us back on the path of integration to some extent. There are different shocks that hit the region, and some of the dividends that are made sometimes are washed away just because of geopolitical and exogenous shocks which are beyond each country's focus or each country's realm when they are setting their policies. Nonetheless, I want to maybe focus, when we look at the region, at climate action. Climate action moving towards renewables on the energy transition has opened up a tremendous space of FDI and cooperation, particularly between Saudi Arabia, UAE, and Egypt. If I take UAE and Egypt, when it comes to renewable energy, several of the companies in UAE are investing with companies in Egypt to actually help us achieve the NDCs with nationally determined contributions by, or our renewable energy targets by 2030. So this is an opportunity and has been an opportunity, not just for FDI, but also the skills that come with it, the technology that is required to push forward on that. If I take a look at connectivity on the electricity side, also with Saudi Arabia, Egypt has a very important project to export electricity to the Gulf. So this is just absolutely. A very, and John, you've been covering the energy space within the region. So this has been a magnet of cooperation between corporates in the countries that we have been talking about, and also private-public partnerships. And this is another important aspect highlighted in the report, but also we see that going forward. Another important element, you mentioned labor, skilled labor. And there are, being Minister of International Cooperation, there's so much we're doing with the multilateral development banks and many of the bilateral agencies to skill, reskill, provide financing at a concessional rate to the private sector, not just to the government. And there are so many programs which have been tailored to be able to create that skilled youth, which can then, and I know Hatem is going to talk about this, but in particular, the startup ecosystem, the innovation ecosystem, which in our case is very, very vibrant and actually exports tremendously to the region, particularly UAE and Saudi. Another important element has been, as of late, more exports from Egypt to the region. And this has, again, on the back of more competitive pricing, We see that in some of the food produced, but also related to some of the furniture and some other things, and that's where there's scope to actually push that forward. And I think that the report goes through some of the policy recommendations that can push forward. Of course, reform is an ongoing process. There's no finish line for reforms, and as the world around us is evolving so much, you walk down the promenade here in Davos, and you basically see AI everywhere. So, again, grasping what that means, not just for the short term, but for the long term, is another big, a disruption factor, which would affect interconnectivity, it would affect interregional trade, it would affect the way the private sector and the public sector work together. Nonetheless, we host many of the corporates in the region. Futtaim is one of the biggest investors in the retail space in the country. And it's a partnership that has been very, very important, particularly at the times of crises. I remember the COVID days, and there was so much interaction between the public sector and the private sector to be able to mitigate the implications with respect to supply chains, but also the pricing for the people of the country. So anyways, I want to congratulate the MENAP for another successful report, very important policy indicators, but also just doing this every year indicates the will to push forward beyond just making the profits for the firm, but also diversifying for other firms as well as sort of fostering which policies should be tackled by government to open up the space for more.
Sure. I think, just to advance the pathways to growth and integration. Futtaim, we were talking just briefly before we sat on the stage here. END is in 16 countries, and you can't have integration without connectivity, right? So, but you want to be able to support economic growth and development, which also, fosters a subscriber base as well. What's your perspective? Rania brought up a couple of really interesting topics here. It's talent, and you need really good talent in these countries. Do you want to start there in terms of creation of talent and the growth markets that you're potentially looking at beyond the MENA region as well?
Actually, if we start with the talent question, the MENA region has an advantage of a very young population across the region. And I think we have, within that young population, the endorsement of the new technologies has been very high. And we see that really everywhere across the region. We see that in the UAE, in Saudi, in Egypt, everywhere. Morocco, we see a lot of graduates that are very technically sound and that are willing to join into this new economy and new frontiers we have, like AI, for example. For example, in the UAE, in the past 3 years, we've been hiring 100 new graduates a year just working on AI. And we're able to source those, and actually there is huge competition to be able to get to the 100. So there are more of those that can go to lots of other businesses as well. We see, again, same phenomena in the other markets. So this is bringing us in the region, when we have that cooperation and integration, into having the scale. And like Ahmed has said, putting the 3 countries together makes it bigger than the UK or France. Putting the whole region together makes them much larger. And for businesses to succeed, whether it's big businesses like us or whether it's an entrepreneur with a startup, you need the big market. And this is why today we see a lot of innovation, for example, coming from the West Coast in the US, because in the US there's a big market that encourages people to come up with ideas and pursue them because there is a big reward. So this region now, with more integration, creates that size that makes that reward bigger, and also makes us strong enough to go outside the region. So I can talk, for example, in EAND, again, our core market, or core markets, is the UAE, Egypt, Saudi, and Morocco in the region.
So the big 3+1 that we're talking about here, right?
However, outside the region, we're now going to Europe. We're investing in Europe. We have now made a number of investments in Africa, but we cannot do that and be successful unless we have the scale in the home markets, in our core markets, in the MENA region, that allows us to go and do this. So we're building, and I think You know, when we look at our investment thesis compared to 10 years ago, now we have the scale and the talent and the capability, the technical capability in the region that allows us to go outside. And I'm not only talking about us. If we're talking, for example, in the top 15 telcos in the world, there are 2 from the region that are in the top 15 in the world. In fact, they are very close to the top 10. And this is something that we did not see a decade ago. And this allows us to compete in technology, similar, for example, to what Emirates has done in aviation. So you see Emirates competes with all the big airlines. In fact, from a reputation and customer experience, it surpasses many of them, and starting from the region. So we will see in the coming period more and more businesses coming out of the region that are competing. We see that now in startups as well.
Okay, so, very good. Why don't we park it there and I'll come back to you. But you raised some very interesting points about training, which I think we should address as well, because as you look for talent as Majid Al Futtaim, like there's the AI university, MBZ AI university, but how do we train our talent in the region too, right? So you don't have to go hunting around the world for them so they don't get pulled into other markets, right? So that's good for a follow-up. Shreen, you made the quietest entrance to the stage I've ever seen. I did flag the fact you were running over here and you got here, so I wanted you to catch your breath before we asked the question, so it's nice to have you. You know, we have a number of crises in the region. It's kind of a rolling narrative for the region, and I actually think it's built a lot of resilience into the region as well, which I think we should talk about, Ahmed. But you have a lot of refugees, and we're looking for talent. So instead of looking through the prism of a dark arena, let's put the rose-colored glasses on and say, what can we do to train this talent that's emerging? So in Syria and some of that are in Jordan, right? Egypt's got refugees as well. It should be looked at as an opportunity. We have schooling set up. What's the best way to integrate these folks into a market of better than 500 million consumers? Thanks. Let's keep your answers to 2 minutes. Yeah,
okay.
We have time.
No, thanks for giving me the opportunity, and I apologize for being late. But thanks for including that topic as part of this discussion, because when you look at the Middle East, you think about the last 15 years and how incredibly generous the countries in the Middle East have been in terms of hosting refugees. We have around 15.8 million refugees living in the MENA region. That's not including the Palestinian population. That's an incredible workforce, as you say. We have had incredible policies for social inclusion in the MENA region, in Jordan, in Iraq, in Egypt in particular, where refugees are allowed to enter schools, they're allowed to enter primary health care, but we're still not there yet in terms of economic policy and inclusion on the economic side. I think while we work on the education side, and we've done some really innovative work together with Vodafone, for example, in Egypt, in terms of bringing refugee and host communities into a kind of tech space, but there's so much more that can be done if there's that opportunity for refugees to access both the higher education as well as the job market. And I think there's some space that needs to be explored there.
Okay.
In terms of access and financial inclusion, for example. And I can explain some of the progress we've seen in other countries, which could be a way that the MENA region could consider including.
Good. Ahmed, do you want to pick up?
I mean, the question of talent is obviously very pertinent. But it's also important to recognize that the region actually is a net exporter of talent. When you look at the reports, when you look at the report and you look at the movement of talent, especially technology talent, there is a significant brain drain outside the region. And integration and private sector players actually offering more jobs and more training opportunities could help reverse that. And as much as we have a net positive on carbon targets for the governments and the private sector, we should have a net positive target on talent, especially emerging talent in the areas of technology and AI. And this is where the private sector needs to play a role, because it's also in our vested interest. If the region would catch up to its fair share of economic growth, and integration does matter, as the report has outlined, Majid Futtaim will be 2 to 3 times the size. That's 2 to 3 times the number of jobs. That's 2 to 3 times the number of training opportunities. So there's plenty to be said that the integration would have this positive ripple impact. I think the other thing, and I appreciate all the policy, I would say, focus The private sector should also lead by example. We have now export business out of Egypt, out of Kenya, and that is very important. And the UAE trade tech accelerates that. But if the private sector doesn't make the investment, the policy framework would be there, but the highways of talent, data, and people would remain largely unutilized.
Interesting. Before you hold on just a second, Shreen, because Rania Mashad has to leave shortly, and I wanted to cover a macro and a micro here. So let's be very brief with the answers. At the macro level, this entry of not just the UAE and Saudi Arabia and Egypt into the BRICS, but you have a huge market of Iran, which is nearly 80 million consumers. We all know its vast resources and a pretty educated population. We heard yesterday from Jake Sullivan, the National Security Advisor to President Biden, said, we're on the cusp potentially in 2024 of breakthroughs with Palestine and Israel, and potentially reuniting this idea of Saudi and Iran having a dialogue. We know the UAE in back channels has been very crucial along with Oman here. But could you see, fast forward, in another 12 to 24 months, there was an article in The Economist that said the new Middle East of peace, but they didn't highlight Palestine, Israel high enough, right? We were sweeping things under the carpet. Can you see a breakthrough where we could actually have phenomenal integration of another large-scale populated economy here?
That's a very tough question, John. I didn't sign up for that one, but
we know you can handle it.
Yeah, I think in the
I'm
Middle
just wondering
East,
if we really want to get that integration, we need to solve the peace issue. Right?
Well, there's no doubt about that, and I think that one of the key outcomes of this conflict currently is that there has to be a political solution and a lasting one. And what has been tried before has not yielded the dividend that all of us are looking for, and it's been affecting businesses, it's been affecting people, it's been affecting policies, certainty, and many others. When you talk about 12 to 24 months, I can tell you that in one day, on a policy front, each and every day looks like infinity. You wake up in the morning, by the end of the day, the number of shocks you have to deal with are plenty. Who would have imagined that the Suez Canal will be affected so dramatically in such a small period of time? And still, the resolution around that is yet to be seen. That is a new dynamic that might, create a lot of discussion, outcomes, which again, have to be very well thought through.
Yeah, the third-party actors,
exactly.
Like whack-a-mole, right? So it makes it difficult.
So that's an uncertain, an exogenous factor that affects the logical or the rational or the normalized progression of discussion as we see. Nonetheless, from a government perspective, when we talk about economics, you have to take these elements as given. You work them out on the political front, but at the end of the day, you have businesses, you have a population, you have a macro outcome that you need to try and make as conducive as possible, so that the growth trajectory, the inflation trajectory, and so forth is as controlled or as managed as possible. So all these factors have definitely a huge impact on the short term, and the idea is how can we continue moving forward with everything that's in the report, with all what businesses and government together can offer in order to, there's going to be definitely a medium to long term beyond this. You mentioned BRICS, and one item on BRICS is that it still needs a lot of work, because the economic frameworks between the countries is still not unified. It's not an EU bloc. But there's a lot when it comes to connectivity, there's a lot when it comes to investment, there's a lot when it comes to possible financing arrangements between the different countries within BRICS. So it provides a very good platform and definitely opportunities which might, again, be very conducive to the intra-regional dynamics within the region. So it's to be tested, it's moving forward. And I think that the countries within the bloc have engagements which have economic basis, and I think that's what's very important at this stage.
Okay, good. Very quickly, because I know you have to run, and Ahmed, if you can follow up, and we'll let Rania go. But take the food sector, for example, which I think is interesting. Egypt, over the last 15 years, I've covered it so closely, developed an agricultural sector that has been extraordinary in a short period of time. Tunisia, Algeria is moving into space. Everybody looks at Sudan. And I think COVID was a big test to try to accelerate this idea of its own sustainability in the region. Do you want to touch on that quickly? You can duck out and I'll pick it up with Ahmed, please.
I mean, food security is extremely important, and I'm sorry that I go back to the climate discussion because adaptation is related to water security and food security, and also it has relationships with climate outcomes. For us in Egypt, a very big market, a very big consumer market for food, but also key exports are food exports. And this, over the past several years, there was huge investments and a lot of encouragement from the government to be able to open that space. But if you take a look at, and I go back to the COVID period, because the private-public partnership and cooperation is really what allowed, a smooth sailing over one of the biggest shocks when it comes to supply, particularly food.
Absolutely.
So this is, again, what I want to say is that the government and the private sector in the country has been tested at a very trying moment. We passed that, and therefore, ongoing, the collaboration on food security within the country is quite robust. We have many UAE companies investing in the food sector. Food processing is another one. Our exports into Europe, into the UAE, mean that there are investment opportunities for more companies to come in. And this is, again, what would add, hopefully, to better statistics in the next intra-regional report that MENAP will be hopefully publishing in 2025.
Okay. Can we give her a nice round of applause? I'm going to pick up the question with you.
Thank you, John. Thank you.
The minister was concerned about her ski boots, but I said it fits right into the to the narrative here. Why don't you come on over, Shireen? Thanks a lot for doing that. Everybody's got to do that. I've been putting them on and putting them off so many times, you just get tired of doing it. So as long as you don't slip, it's the way to roll. So thank you very much. Do you want to pick up on this idea and your sourcing? Yes. And then I'm going to follow up with Shireen and Futtaim here too on that talent that we were talking about in the best application. Thank you for your patience.
Food and retail is obviously very important. Food security is top of mind. It is the third largest contributor to GDP after oil and gas and infrastructure in our part of the world. And it is, I would say, almost heartbreaking to know that while we import a lot of our food from outside the region, because of interregional trade not being as smooth, interregional food trade in the Middle East has the highest food waste ratios in the world.
I know, it's
almost double.
Yeah. Is it about 30%, or how high is it?
I believe we're about 8 to 9%. Global averages are 3 to 4%.
All right.
And if we have better integration, if we have better, I would say, cold supply chains, a faster clearer of immigration, documentation, etc., that waste alone is perhaps enough to feed one of the countries in our part of the world. So regional integration does matter. And in absence of that integration, provides a disincentive for retailers like ourselves to invest more in private label. It provides a disincentive for FDI because you know that the waste is so high. So it's, again, another potential dividend out of better regional integration.
Yeah. In Africa, the reason I use that number of 30% of the farming products in sub-Saharan Africa, because they don't have the infrastructure, 30% never makes it to a market like a Carrefour, which is something we have to make a dent into. I'm going to pick up with Futtaim here, the potential for AI, because you talked about the opportunity, and then there's this worry about job destruction. You want to advance your platforms as fast as possible. But this idea that Ahmed brought up is training talent in the market to keep them in the market. What's your analysis as EN showing you where you're going to be pulling in talent from the future?
So I can tell you it's actually, I have a little bit of difference in opinion with Ahmed, because I think actually export of talent is also good for the region. So some of the markets in the region, like Egypt, like Morocco and so on, actually remittances is a big source of income for these countries.
Yeah, but I think Ahmed's point is we don't want them leaving the MENA region.
Yeah,
but,
so we have, I think, enough talent in the region, and we have a lot of programs to train that talent. You mentioned the MBZ AI University. We have a number of programs with them to develop the right talent. We have also similar programs with other universities in other countries in the region as well. And this allows us to get the people into the business in the start. And that's then where they learn, because again, education is a great first start, but actually you develop talent through work. And actually a lot of the people that go outside the region have first worked in companies like EAND, like MAF, like any of the other telcos in the region. They have gained the experience, and then they become more valuable to go abroad. But we have enough supply in, I think, to keep going. But having said that, a good use of that talent in the region is also in startups, because while big businesses are growing, there is huge opportunity in the ecosystem for startups. And I can mention a few of them. One of them, for example, is Karim, which was one of the first unicorns in the region, which we have now the fortune to be a main shareholder in. And we see the amount of people that are engaged, the energy within that business and the capability and talent. We see also others, like in the music services and Rem.
Absolutely.
We see Swivel.
Well,
which
Souk.com, which became Amazon.
Souk, which became, but that actually became Amazon, so became outside the region. I'm talking ones that are still in the region.
It still employs a lot of people in the region.
Swivel,
right?
another example. So there are a number of companies that ended up employing a lot of people, developing talent, developing capability, and also they would not have been able to get there if they just relied on the market in one country. And you look at all of them, they work across the region. So the easier we make it possible to work across the region, we make to exchange talent, to also have things like custom policies that really encourage that cross investments, will not only grow the big businesses like us, but also will grow a lot of these startups. And they are going to be a big important pillar of growth.
Yeah, it's a phenomenal point, because you think of the talent that comes from Egypt, Jordan, Morocco, Tunisia, Algeria, that comes into the Gulf states, for example, is pretty impressive. And as you say, the startup culture has taken off. I think there's a lot of non-tariff barriers that the businesses complain about still, so we don't act like a single market, realizing the potential. I wanted to bring Shireen back into the conversation here, and I was just wondering, what's the best way the private sector, along with government, can equip refugees to integrate as fast as possible? And what's being done, if you can add into this, housing, so they're not living in refugee camps? It's a big issue, because they feel so isolated from the ability to reintegrate into the economy.
Absolutely. I mean, I think you hit the nail on the head. What needs to be done, and you're talking about startups, we've seen it in other regions where refugees have the right to work, where they have the right to open bank accounts, where they have the right to borrow funds. There you see the beginnings of startups, and you see them sort of working into that global environment. What can others do? What can the private sector do? We just had a very big breakthrough, for example, in Kenya, where Safaricom, they wanted to allow refugees to get mobile phones, because if they have a mobile phone, they can get a mobile wallet. If they have a mobile wallet, they can open a business, and then the rest is history. They can start saving, they get financial literacy. But in Kenya, until very recently, refugees were not allowed to have a SIM card. But this was the joint venture of basically Safaricom, seeing refugees as a customer, but also seeing that this could actually help them, pull them out of poverty, pull them out of debt. So Safaricom has been the main actor. We had tried for years to convince the Kenyan government to open the SIM card and the KYC to refugees.
This is the connectivity that Hatem was talking about, right?
And so it's only happened 2 months ago. The Kenyan government passed a law that refugees now can have SIM cards, and this will open a huge economy, because we know there is an economy. We know, I think a lot of people look at refugee situations, or you mentioned camps. Some are in camps, some are in urban areas. They think there's no economy there. There actually is, and we've had studies and reports done that actually you have to see refugees as customers in certain aspects, and also as entrepreneurs and people who have a lot of innovation. So I think there's the policy aspect, for me, is the number one in terms of ensuring that refugees have access to those tools or those rights wherever they're living. And as we know, refugees prefer to live as close to home as possible. and will eventually hope to go home. This is not always the case, and we have refugees displaced now for over decades, especially in the MENA region. So I think it's working together with private sector to say, okay, where's your shortage? I mean, what are the labor gaps that you see coming in the next 10 to 15 years? And how can we use this population and work together vis-a-vis the government to ensure that those sectors can at least be opened up for refugees to study and then to start working, but also to be able to open bank accounts and saving, and combined with, of course, financial literacy and areas that would support them to be successful.
Good. I met one of the low-cost housing, and they were scaling it down even more to test model this in Ukraine to give them, just a home with electricity and running water and stability, and looking for private sector investment, which I think is a model it could use. You look at the case of Sudan right now, is quite, alarming, and the number of the Syrian refugees. What I wanted to cover with the two from the private sector here is, I've been impressed by this region in its resilience. Because if I was an American businessman or a European businessman and I kind of saw rolling thunder of challenges, you'd panic. But the smart ones always say, to me, you have to see the light at the end of the tunnel. We kind of roll with the punches, and then we need to advance and not forget about integration. How do you see it, to share some knowledge here with this audience about the resilience that this region has built up, and it's still advanced and it's still integrating, but there's more work to be done?
It's perhaps foundational to the character of the region, this sense of resilience. Perhaps because we're a very old region as well, so we've seen it all.
Yeah, we've seen it. It's true.
But I think the one thing to remember is, as much as there is an upside to integration, there is also a discount to disintegration. I mean, we only have maybe a handful or more of unicorns in the region. Most of them
are much better, right?
And all of them are UAE based for a good reason, because that's the easiest place, magnet for talent, easy to raise financing, etc. India, on the other hand, has 100 unicorns. In fact, the numbers show if we get our fair share of investment and opportunities for the existing talent that we have, we should have 50 unicorns and perhaps a couple of decacorns.
Oh, wow.
And we don't have that. And that in itself automatically generates opportunities, generates jobs. It lifts all ships in a way. And it gives, you're absolutely right, we need to give hope to the region. And that integration could be a big unlock of hope. So if we have the resilience and we have hope, then the future could be quite bright.
Yeah, it's interesting. But you touch on a point here. The UAE is bringing in talent from, Silicon Valley now, right? So it is what do you think of the policy of making sure that your immigration policies and the flexibility of like a talent visa to bring in people? So you want to have homegrown talent, but you want to have that flexibility and creativity and sitting at the crossroads of East and West, Asian talent, African talent, European and American talent, correct?
I think I'll answer this question actually and answer a little bit of your previous question. So
sure.
First thing, I think the UAE had made tremendous leaps in policy by offering things like golden visas and the ability for people to get long-term residence. Because I think before, when people evaluated taking jobs, they looked at it as transient and insecure. Now, with these new regimes, people are much more excited about coming to the UAE. And when I look at the people we employ, we're able to attract talent from all over the world, really all over. So not only from the region, but from way beyond. Everybody is coming, and again, when they see the quality of the life in the region, in the UAE, they get excited about it. Many of them stay for many years. But also, an advantage that we have in a market like the UAE now is AI. So you touched on AI. So today, one of the, let's say, the issues sometimes in talents that do repetitive jobs. And as AI advances, I think we will see more and more of these things that are being automated in a way where also it will solve part of the talent problem that we have, because a lot of things will be automated, whether it's desk jobs or whether it's something like a bus driver in the future, where we are having autonomous buses or autonomous taxis. You will need less bus drivers and taxi drivers.
Right. That's a very good point.
And you know, that's, I think this is not something that's 10 years from now. This is something that's going to be, that's being tested now There's probably we'll see a lot more of it in the next 3-4 years.
Yeah. Before I sat down today with you, there was an AI in healthcare, and the UAE is modeling it faster than anybody else in the region. So it just goes to show if you adopt, have the right education base or magnet for talent, you can push it much faster. We're almost out of time. We started about 5 minutes late due to schedules today. I'm just going to ask for each one of you to recap. I'm going to start with Shireen. Biggest priority for you in terms of integration? Hatem, you touched on a lot of different things, but if you one that you think that needs to resonate with this audience, and I'll ask the same for you, Ahmed, as the one who's put this session together. Shireen?
The biggest priority for me is to change the policies in the region so that we can liberate refugees from being dependent on our support and philanthropic support and aid to being empowered to be resilient and contributing to society and to the economy, as we very well know they can, and we've seen in other parts of the world.
Okay, so should that go through the Arab League, or what do you need for a kind of a blanket change of mindset on that one?
I think it's individual countries, but I think they're influencing each other. So I think the private sector has a huge role to play, because the private sector often can influence policy at the government level more than we can at the UN.
Very interesting. Okay, Hatem?
I think that the region offers great opportunity. I think we are known as a region for being the home of many of the biggest sovereign funds in the world. I think over the next decade, we'll see also the region being home to many large companies that are global, operating not only within the region, but outside. And I think also on the startup scene, I think, Ahmed's prophecy will be, hopefully there where we see tens, if not hundreds, of unicorns coming from the region. And I have a lot of confidence that we'll see that, because many companies and many investors are now focusing on that ecosystem.
Great. Floor is yours, sir.
So I think for me, the biggest, I would say, headline is how can we get a collective shift of narrative and ambition for the region, that we are truly on the cusp of a new golden age for the Arab world. And the three leading economies, UAE, Saudi, and Egypt, can lead the way and can perhaps unlock opportunities that are far beyond what we can see today, and for the region to be home to hundreds of startups, S&P, 100 organizations, and fully unlock its full potential. So I think it's a message of hope, ambition, and self-belief.
Self-belief is interesting. I tell you, in the 10 years I was living there, it's been a lot that changed. One, we talked about the sovereign wealth funds. They used to only tilt west, right? It was U.S. and Europe. The diversification of the portfolios, but also of the bilateral relationships in Asia and the Asian talent that's come in now has been profound. And having the sovereign funds, I think, is a great point. Invest in the talent in the region to create that is something that hasn't happened yet, which I think is a great idea, to work with sovereign funds to co-invest in some of these countries and some of the talent. Even set aside, like Mubadala does, funds for startups, I think is brilliant in terms of the strategy. What a great group. Thanks for joining us. I'm glad you made it. I know how difficult it is to navigate the halls of Davos and some of the security checks, but I'm glad you did.
Thank you.
Rania always does a good job of contributing, and she did. Thanks for convening us. It's great. Can we have a nice round of applause for the panel? Thank you very, very much. Good.
Thank you very much.